So part C of this question asks you to draw the best map for the genes indicating the map distances. And to do this, I'm going to use the same method that I used in the other video when I had 2 chromosomes, all right? So you're still going to look at 2 genes at a time, okay? And I started with pallid and raven, okay? So I look at pallid and raven. I want to have a double crossover, a single crossover event between pallid and raven. So I would have 1 mutant copy and 1 wild type copy of either pallid or raven, okay? So 1 of each, either one. So then you go back up here and you look at the first crossover event and you have a mutant pallid, but you also have a mutant raven. So we're not going to pick that up. Then you go to the second part and you have to assume here because the wild types are not listed here. So you have a wild type pallid and a wild type raven, so you're not going to count this either. This one here, you've got a mutant pallid. That means you've got a wild type raven here. So we're going to grab that number, 23, and we're going to include it in our calculations. And in the next one, you have a mutant raven, and you know that you have a wild type pallid. So you're going to take this number too, okay? And here you've got mutant raven, wild type pallid, mutant pallid, wild type raven. All right, so you're going to include 1, 2, 3, 4 of these numbers into your calculations, add them all together, divide them by the total progeny, which we know is 1,000, and multiply that by 100 to get the answer of 5 map units. Okay, that is your first. That is the first one to solve. Okay, then you can move on to dwarf and rumpled, and you do the exact same thing. You just go back to the first single crossover event. Do you see dwarf here? Is it dwarf and rumpled? Yeah, okay, so we're looking for dwarf and rumpled. I see rumpled is mutant. That must mean dwarf is here as a wild type. So I grab that number, and here I see dwarf as a mutant. So I must have rumpled as a wild type. So I'm going to grab that number too. And then here, I've got rumpled as a mutant, and dwarfed must be wild type. And here, I've got dwarf as a mutant, so rumpled must be wild type. All right, so in this case, I'm going to take all of these numbers, okay? So far I have 48, 47, 23, 22. Don't think that it's always just a single crossover event and all the double crossover events brought together. Because if you come down here now to the double crossover event, you see dwarf and rumpled. So you're not going to grab this because both of these are mutant. Okay? And in this one, because neither one of them is listed as a mutant, you have to assume that both of them are wild type. So you're not going to grab that number either. So to solve the distance between dwarf and rumpled, you are going to add up 48, 23, 22, and 47, multiply all of that by the progeny, which is 1,000, divide it by the progeny, and then multiply by 100 to get 14 map units, okay? So don't fall into the trap that you think, oh, I've got to grab 2 of these single crossovers and then all of the double crossovers. Be very careful on your exam tomorrow. Okay, yeah. So now we found pallid and raven, dwarf and rumpled, and then you can go on to do pallid and rumpled and dwarf and raven, okay? And you're going to get all of these answers, same with raven and rumpled, okay? Now, one issue that you're going to have is with pallid and dwarf in this problem, right? You are going to go and look back at the progeny and notice that pallid and dwarf always are seen in trans to each other. So you've got pallid here and dwarf is trans to it. In this single crossover, pallid and dwarf are again in trans. Pallid and dwarf in trans. Pallid and dwarf in trans. So that is telling you that they are always assorting in trans and never incis in any of the progeny. So that basically tells you that they must be too close together to separate during recombination. Okay? And that's your first sort of clue. And then also, when you calculate all of the rest of your map distances, you'll see that the distance between, let's see, hang on one second. Pallid and Raven is 5 map units, right? But then Dwarf and Raven is also 5 map units, all right? So you know that, okay, fine. Raven is in the middle. You know that from here, okay? So, and then you look at the rest of them and you see the same pattern. So Raven and Rumpled, between this, you've got 10 map units, right? And then you look at Dwarf and Rumpled, you've got about 14 map units. Okay, that kind of adds up, fine, right? And then Pallid and Rumpled, again, 14 map units. So what does that tell you about Pallid and Dwarf? They are really very close to each other, according to the map distances, as well as to the fact that they never sort in cis to each other in any of the progeny. Okay? And so that is basically your answer. This is the map. You've got Pallid and Dwarf close together right here, about approximately 5 map units away from Raven, and then Raven is approximately 10 map units away from Rumpled. Okay? Great.